Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.
Hi, I'm David Manti, and welcome to a new episode of the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast. With me today is Matt Hutchinson, Chief Product Officer of LeafLink. Thank you very much for joining me today, Matt.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate the time, David.
Before we get started, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You could also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to your inbox first. Matt, I always like to start with a little bit of background. So tell us about yourself. How is it that you found yourself in cannabis?
Yeah, it's a great question. I've been in cannabis now close to 5 years, which I think in a lot of places makes me kind of an old head in the space. Although, of course, there's plenty who have been in longer. My background is a little bit unique. I started my career in more traditional industries. So started in doing some consulting work really around supply chain software. Went to Amazon for a while and learned what I believe were a lot of best practices in how to connect the supply chain utilizing technology. I think known really, really well for its prime service offering. But what I really found when I looked under the hood was just a set of really interconnected systems that were tied together in the right ways to really enable that type of customer experience. Then went on to Walmart to kind of continue to hone that in. And when I got there, I started looking at the cannabis space a little bit more closely. I was in New York at this point, was starting to have some conversations with Ryan and Zach at LeafLink, and thought that it made a ton of sense to start to bring some of those practices that I had learned into the cannabis industry and start to try and mature some of the supply chain aspects that when I entered, you still had, and I think in a lot of places you still do have sales reps driving from door to door, doing the deliveries of products. And there's, of course, a ton of risk that comes with that, especially when you tie in a lot of the cash. So it felt like there was a lot of opportunity to try and help the industry in that way. What I didn't anticipate and that have since learned, and I think is what has enabled LeafLink to continue to innovate, is that this industry is incredibly nuanced, is both amazing from a cultural perspective, but as well as having to deal with very much snowflake markets in terms of regulation, industry dynamics, the different market participants that are involved. And so it's what has allowed me to stay so interested and hyper-focused on innovating here. But also what I think, is really where there's opportunity to start to lay the groundwork for what kind of a new industry can look like.
Do those nuances ever frustrate you?
I would, just like everybody else, they can be incredibly frustrating. Whether it is like in this state, for example, in New York, you can't have greater than 30-day terms and you're trying to release, financial service solutions to free up working capital. You've kind of got to deal with all of those. And these aren't nuances that are, the nuances are specific to cannabis, but localization nuances are something that a lot of companies have figured out how to navigate historically. And so we've been building that motion, feel really good about as we're building our technology, taking into consideration what are some of those localizations that could come back and change over time. We equate it to like doing business in the US versus Canada versus Europe. You've got a bunch of different regulatory constructs, different market operators, different cultural impacts that change the way in which you approach those markets.
So do you see these regulatory hurdles easing over time or maybe restricting over time?
It's an interesting question. My perspective, and this is informed by conversations that we have internally, but as well as just talking to a lot of different industry participants, is it does feel like you're going to continue to see fragmentation in terms of how people actually regulate. I don't foresee a world where all of a sudden the federal government is going to say, okay, not only are we deregulating it, we're also going to start taking over all of those components of managing the daily operations. It just doesn't seem super feasible. I think it's a much greater likelihood that they legalize it. However, they give the hands to the states to make the determination. You're still going to have to deal with those nuances, and it's not specific to cannabis. You see it in other industries like alcohol, for example. Not indicating that I think that cannabis is the same as alcohol, but you do start to see some of these local market flavors that I think are because you've got kind of that local regulation.
So, with a pedigree that includes Walmart and Amazon, when you jumped into cannabis, did you find yourself kind of going back to root or like day one of the market in terms of its maturity and what it was looking for when it comes to solutions?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think is really important for not just myself or anybody at LeafLink, but just in general, is to take the learnings of what you've had, but know that they're just learnings and they're not the solution, right? And I think one of the places that I've seen really, really intelligent and smart people struggle in this space is take what they've done somewhere else and try and just copy and paste it here. It doesn't work like that. There are too many of these, I'll call them specialties of the space that you just kind of only learn by talking to a lot of people, and you've got to go build that muscle and you got to go build that understanding of what these operators have been through. It's the news doesn't capture it super well, in my opinion. Like, these operators are dealing with a lot of hard things. It's not just a lack of sophistication, though, in a lot of ways, because of the stigma that was around the space. You had trouble getting some of the right talent, and now that you have challenges with working capital and accessing capital in the space, you now have trouble with hiring and retaining great folks. It's just it's par for the course and the challenges that these industry operators deal with. And so, when I came into the space, I wanted to, and I took a keen eye to make sure that, yes, I have this background that is helpful, but it's just a background that helps inform my future decisions based upon what the specifics of the current challenges that are in front of us. And those challenges in this space continue to evolve and change over time. The challenges of 2019 California cash crunch are different from the 2024 California cash crunch problems that we see today that you've got to be able to continue to be dynamic and move forward with.
Did you have a personal connection to the industry at all?
I don't, other than, just kind of watching it from the sidelines for a long time. You know, I say that I've got family members who have very much leaned on it to help them get through some of the challenging parts of their lives. I've got other close friends who lean on it to help them with their day to day and become a better version of themselves in a lot of ways, thinking through how they can, whether it's a creative role or whether it's what helps level them out a little bit from anxiety. I've kind of seen it on both sides, but my personal motivations were really around getting into an industry that you don't see a lot of passion in e-commerce retail the way that you do in the cannabis space. You don't see, I've done projects ranging from like when I was in the consulting days, from like an Ann Taylor apparel retail to Boot Barn, figuring out which pairs of Ariats to put in what locations, and you just don't have the same type of passion. And so, talking with different people in the industry, looking at how nascent it was and how interesting it would be to kind of be part of that group, even if just a small piece that helped move it forward, was really, really exciting to me.
What is LeafLink?
What is LeafLink? So LeafLink is the B2B wholesale commerce platform. And so what that means specifically is if you want to go and purchase goods as a retailer from manufacturers, vendors, suppliers, doing it on LeafLink is the safest way and the most trustworthy way to do it. We've been rolling out a number of different solutions that help to eliminate some of the working capital challenges of the space. And then as a manufacturer, supplier, wholesaler, distributor selling to retailers, we again are trying to eliminate that transaction risk that's happening in the space today. I think it's pretty well covered on some of the payments, delinquencies that are in the AR challenges that are in the space. We're working to solve that, create a centralized place where retailers can go on, find all of their brands, do all of their purchasing, and do it in a way where they're buying the right things at the right time, and that the sellers are getting the most exposure they possibly can. We've continued to iterate and innovate, and so that's really where, if you've seen the news around Dama and that Dama Financial acquisition, being able to leverage those types of tools to, again, kind of figure out ways in which we can offer working capital type solutions for these retailers, better underwrite the space, and ultimately free up the cash flow that seems to be constrained in the industry.
How are you the safest and most trustworthy spot? And how do you help solve some of those accounts receivable traditional problems?
Yeah, it's great question. And, it's one of those things where you have to really deeply understand kind of what's been happening in the space. And I think a lot of people have kind of assumed that, and I read a great article in MJ Biz Daily this morning, kind of talking about some of the AR and collections challenges in the space. The area that we've dug a level deeper is to understand what's causing those challenges. And oftentimes what we find is you've got procurement folks on the retail side who are being inundated with sales reps from all the different brands and don't have clear visibility or data or information into what their working capital situation looks like. So they try these different brands. They sometimes overbuy, sometimes underbuy, wrong inventory at the wrong place. They get themselves into a position where they've got to start to pay people for inventory that hasn't sold yet. You look at more traditional industries, those things are solved with working capital lines of credit. Those things are solved with financing terms that aren't really prevalent in the space today, not at a price point that's reasonable. And so what we've aimed to try and do is tackle that problem head on by saying, hey, look, we've got these solutions. One of them is this solution that we've recently launched called Payment on Sell-Through. We're calling it Post. That essentially says you buy inventory, we're going to track that inventory sell-through. We're going to show you what you've sold through, when you need to be reordering. But on top of that, we're going to facilitate your accounts payable for you. So when you start to get, when you have inventory where the brand's not selling through at that store, you're not actually paying for that until it sells through. And so you actually have de-risked the inventory carry risk on their part, and you've also motivated the brand to sell you what they really think they can move from a consumer perspective. And so that's the buyer side and de-risking the actual purchase. On the seller side, we feel so strongly in our mechanisms to actually prevent these retailers from overextending themselves, that we're actually guaranteeing that the seller is going to get paid. And so if for whatever reason, the retailer, whether it's they go delinquent on their bank account or they go out of business, LeafLink's actually guaranteeing that we're going to make sure that the seller is made whole at the end of the life cycle of the purchase. So in that way, more like traditional marketplaces, when an order is placed, you're going to get paid for it. What quality of goods you're going to get, and your brands have to stand behind the value of what they're selling you, which we think is ultimately going to create a much healthier ecosystem between the buyer and the seller.
Well, I understand how that de-risks the situation for sellers, but how does that not put LeafLink at risk?
So LeafLink has built a number of different proprietary tools in which we can actually monitor that sell-through and be proactive in ensuring that the right quantities are showing up in the right places. And taking it a step further, we've actually built out tools where we can monitor account balances so that we can get ahead of the risks ahead of time and actually underwrite that risk. And so when you're a retailer that's able to utilize this product or this solution, we know that you've got the money in the bank, and that based on your historical sell-through and what we think is going to happen here, that you're actually in a position to where LeafLink feels comfortable in its underwriting. And then on top of that, we've got backstop mechanisms to make sure that we're going to be around for the long haul and make sure that these solutions are sustainable in a way that our customers aren't changing their processes to have to be changed again. I'll just add, this isn't just us that's saying that these things are super powerful. We've got some case studies on it, but even we're the only one who's actually been able to underwrite and have an insurance provider to back these things. So if for any situation that comes up, if LeafLink were to be over its skis too far, we have an actual insurance provider who's looked at our processes, who's looked at our mechanisms, and feels really good about the actual solution that we've put in place. Which I don't think there's anybody else in the industry that can kind of say that.
When you talk about the case studies and using it to its fullest potential, is anybody using LeafLink to its fullest potential? I was just having a conversation the other day about how a lot of operators will bring these tools in-house and then just think it's plug and play and that's it. Are people getting everything they can out of LeafLink?
I'm always going to say no, David. I think there's always opportunity for people to get more. As I kind of mentioned, this is a relatively new solution that we rolled out. We've been testing it now for a little over 10 months, and so we know it works really well, but we didn't start putting it in market until the end of Q2. So it's still relatively new. So I think there's still plenty of folks who could better utilize it. I think there are some things that LeafLink could be doing better too, to be helping our customers. And so I think at the end of the day, being able to better surface our customers' data to them so that they can actually better run their business is certainly an opportunity that we are excited to continue to roll out solutions around. We've recently rolled out a retail insights, inventory insights analytic that was built by the former head of national procurement for an MSO that deeply understands how to drive profitability, leveraging point of sale and seed to sale data coupled with our wholesale data to be able to show customers the right quantity, the right time, and the right locations to eliminate stockouts and to maximize return on your inventory investments. And so I think there's always going to be rooms in which most of our customers can continue to iterate and more fully utilize the solutions we've built. I do think that there are some power users in key markets. Michigan is one that kind of comes true, where we have great market acceptance and buy-in, and we've got customers that just kind of use us across the board as kind of that one-stop shop for their wholesale tech stack, where they're really utilizing, whether it's our order management, to our CRM, to our marketplace, to our advertising to help grow their brand, to our retail solutions, kind of that full gambit.
As the chief product officer, how do you determine when a product is ready to go to market versus constantly fine-tuning it and letting scope creep kind of get the best of you?
Our mantra is really around iterate and learn quickly. I'm not one to say, hey, we're gonna get to this particular point and all of a sudden it's going to become live in the market. What we look at is actually, let's get a proof of concept to market. Do our customers even care about this? If we give them it, are they going to use it? Keep it very tiny, small test, learn a lot as fast as possible. Then we start to roll out incremental enhancements on it. And when we start, and the way that we look at when we go from proof of concept, which we internally call minimum lovable product, to beta, where we start to open it up a little bit, to, I'll call it general audience ready, is based upon metrics that look at the number of users, how well they're using it, what our scores are from a net promoter score and a customer satisfaction perspective. And then only then do we say, okay, this is something that we're gonna unlock to the market and start to really unleash. Now, there are some things like post that we saw such broad-based exuberance for that we've moved faster and we've said, hey, this thing is something that people want their hands on. Let's release it and start getting in the hands of more and more customers. But ultimately, that was again driven by the market acceptance and excitement around the solution as it sat before we did so.
When I recently went to the website, I received this pop-up or interstitial about a warning about recruitment scams. What's going on?
To be honest with you, that's the first I've heard of that. We do. I imagine you went to our LeafLink.com, didn't log into the application. There are always. It's really. I mean, you'll probably see this outside of just even this space. It feels like the scams are getting stronger and smarter across the board. And I don't think some of the things around AI are making it particularly simpler for us. But ultimately, my gut is that probably had some people emailing from some fake HR at leaflink.com to people that led them astray. And sometimes you just can't help but be targeted, especially in an industry that's a little bit less the focal point of enforcement agencies. That said, nothing to my knowledge has actually come of that other than just some concern potentially.
Okay. Transitioning to e-commerce in the industry, how would you describe the current state of e-commerce in cannabis?
Yeah, so I'll focus largely on what I know best on the wholesale side of e-commerce. But we can dive a little bit into the retail to B2C side if that's helpful as well for you. I would say that when you look at wholesale commerce today and e-commerce in particular, you end up getting a more traditional kind of like view of I go online, I shop for a product, I buy a product, it gets delivered to me. It's not really how wholesale works, right? If you think about it, I'm a retail store. Every purchase that I make is considered, and that consideration is around what's the ROI that I'm going to get on that inventory that I buy. And on top of that, there are nuances that you as a consumer don't even think about when you're buying on a more traditional e-commerce platform. In particular, you have a credit card in your pocket, you put said credit card in, charges your account. Different websites charge it at different times, but nonetheless, there's no risk in that transaction because you've already put your credit card information in. On the back end, there's usually a commission of 15% that goes to the platform. Cannabis, it's in cannabis wholesale in particular, you've got a brand that might have to accept different payment methods by different retailer. So they may want to do net 15, net 30. Some will want to do ACH. Some will want to do cash or check. How do you start to simplify that story? That's just on I'll call it the checkout component. And how do you bifurcate what the buyer wants from what the seller wants? Because those are two typically very different things. Moving backwards in the conversion funnel, wholesale commerce is significantly different than your B2C space, largely because you're not actually looking for a one-time purchase. You're potentially reordering, or you're potentially wanting to negotiate particular terms on a given good based on the margin profile, things that you don't really think about while you're shopping on Amazon or Walmart. And so what we've started to test and kind of are in that kind of MLP phase that I was talking about is giving our retailers and brands the ability to actually negotiate on platform on a line-by-line basis and annotate the specific pieces of information that they're sharing on that actual order, so that if for whatever reason the sales rep needs to go back and look at historical information from the order, it's all right there. So that the purchasing manager at a retail store can figure out, I ordered this, but I received this. Like, what's that three-way match reconciliation process look like so that they're not overpaying? And so we look at that e-commerce flow and the role of a marketplace in wholesale e-commerce as a way to actually simplify a lot of those, I'll call them buying operations that take place on an order by order basis.
Okay. With those negotiations, do you find them typically remaining civil?
Civil or simple?
Civil.
Okay.
I guess the way that you asked simple, I'm going to ask that one follow. No.
I actually think civil, typically, yes, right? Like, it's usually hey, I heard this person's getting this price. How come like, that's like the worst of it, right? A lot of times what we see is like, if I bought something and it doesn't sell, instead of working with the brand to figure out why it didn't sell, was it a price point problem? Was it a fit problem of that particular form factor? I'll give you an example in just a second. They'll just stop ordering from that brand, which is not really conducive to a long-term sustainable relationship between the brand and the retailer. And I think that is also kind of what causes some of the problems. Whereas, what we actually saw when we started releasing in our early days of Post was we actually, we showed them the data. And with Post, we show both sides what the sell-through data is so that the brand's able to fix their or get their manufacturing in process so their sales reps can reach out when quantities are low, those kind of things. But when we were going through our early testing, we had the retail store and we had the brand hop on a call with us, kind of sitting in the middle, just to hear and listen to those interactions. And it was so interesting. The retailer says, well, I went ahead and bought more than I knew I needed because I didn't want you to think that I was trying to get a low average order value. So there's this, there's order minimums that a lot of different brands invoke. And so they were trying to avoid that. And the brand then says, oh, well, I didn't want this inventory just to sit in the back. And well, how do we actually solve this? Oh, well, I'll just get rid of your minimum order value, or I'll lower it so long as now I have this visibility and I can actually group these things together. We took it a step further and they're like, well, we're not going to order this SKU anymore. And it was packaged Ace. It's in a college town that prefers kind of your deli style, pick your nug out and move on. Well, that's great information for this brand now. Okay, well, now we'll start doing bulk sales to this part of the state that they would have never thought about. So these conversations can become so valuable and rich when you can actually have something that's there mediating what's going on rather than being on two separate sides of a text message or an email.
So with all this information that's coming in and out of the platform, how do you create insights based on what's happening in the market?
Yeah, I think that you got to kind of take traditional metrics and then listen to some anecdotes along the way. What we have now is the ability to kind of see what the wholesale prices are across the different states in which we operate. We can kind of see how they change, and we offer, we kind of put that information out publicly in terms of our LeafLink market data that we release. I believe it's every June or July, just to kind of show the state of the industry and what's happening. When you have that data, what you can then surface, with, of course, the permission of the retailer and the brand is, what is happening at a hyper local level. And so as a retailer, I may really be interested in brands that fit a certain price point so that I can not have cannibalism happening in a particular category on my shelf. We see this one all the time. You've got 4 different pens, all the same size, all the same form factor, all the same price. what you've done is you've alienated a portion of your potential customer base and then also really, really hurt your brand relationships. Now, we have the data. We can surface that to the retailer to say, hey, you've got cannibalism happening here. We've got assortment challenges that we think if you just did two less of this pen of this, we're not going to make the choice. We're going to let the data make the choice on which brand's doing the better marketing to drive the consumer sell through. But maybe go for a good, better, best approach, or maybe just carry 3 of these different types of SKUs. And so you can actually free up your working capital and actually grow your top line all at the same time. We do the same on the other side, where we're telling brands, hey, here's what we're seeing. These stores are not moving products the same way based on these categories, based on these price points, based on these consumer demographics. Try shuffling this information around. So those are some of the things that are more 2025 coming in terms of the insights that we're going to be and the analytics we're going to be able to provide. But you really can, with the wholesale data, get some really interesting operational hints as to where you can drive increased top line and cost improvements.
Well, that's incredibly powerful information. Will that be automated, and how will that be served to the customer? Will that be, an automatic update? How will they be notified?
It's a great question. We've got a couple different ways in which we're thinking through it, right? The solution as it stands today that gives a brand visibility into what exactly is selling through to the retailer. We've got reporting on what the current in-stock rates are, what the sell-through is on a per week basis. And these are today very basic reports in a kind of an embedded framework within the platform. Information is still incredibly valuable. I think if I'm a sales rep, when I call a store, I can see that these have been selling at this rate. Like, let's make sure we don't run out of stock and really almost get to a point of vendor managed inventory at that point. Over time, and when I say over time, I mean within the next quarter or so, these things become a lot smarter. And so as a retailer, in our kind of premium package that we're starting to roll out this quarter and then into 2025, you're actually going to be going through, your ordering process and see where you've got too much in stock. Don't order this much, or just order this much. And that's actually part of your shopping experience to show you the right economic order quantity to make sure that you're not getting yourself over your skis. In addition, as you're going through, you'll find where you have an assortment gap that a particular SKU solves for. And so our recommendation engines are built in a way that will show you SKUs that are filling holes in your current assortment. We'll be able to provide data as to why those things are happening. And so that when you're shown those SKUs, what the reason we're showing those are. And the other thing we're doing is looking at, when do you start to rationalize SKUs? When do you start to say this SKU is not carrying or paying its rent? And so those are all, pieces of the platform that we already have an embedded analytics around, but are starting to embed into the actual operational workflows to even further simplify that role and kind of take some of the thinking out of some of these more, I'll call them systematic decisions that allow purchasing managers to be more proactive with their time towards negotiating better deals, figuring out what marketing strategies need to look like with their brands, and really figuring out how to be a better partner long-term with their suppliers.
How do you determine when to rationalize those SKUs?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think there's a lot of different studies around it, right? In terms of, looking at price points, understanding that this isn't driving either basket size or it's not actually generating the profit that it warrants to sit on the shelf. We've actually developed a proprietary algorithm that's looking at is looking at what is that sell through? How is it contributing to these other factors around the profitability? And what Andrew Rexroad on my team has dubbed the profitability index of a SKU, and based on that profitability index, kind of calling out where there's opportunity for that to go up significantly with a statistical measure to then constantly be reevaluating those SKUs, making sure that you have the most optimum performance. And over time, it's going to cause the entire assortment to perform better than the current baseline. And we've seen some really, really powerful results from that.
You had mentioned the market report. According to the LeafLink summer market report, it says the long-term prospects of the cannabis industry are, quote, better today than at any part of the last few years. In your opinion, why is that?
I think things are starting to stabilize a little bit. I'd be curious to your perspective on that, right? I mean, I'm sure you talk to a lot of different people that are in various parts of the cannabis supply chain, and one way or another are going to be impacted by the actual, downstream demand that's happening at the consumer level. I think there's some stabilization happening. I think on top of that, if you look at it from a very macro view, you've got new states starting to come on that have just been getting talked about for a long time that are actually happening. You're starting to see New York start to get its motion going, knowing that it has had some false start, slow start problems. Initially, it's starting to get its footing. You've got Ohio starting to really, really run. New Jersey's getting going at this point. Maryland, I think, has been a bright spot in the news. So you're starting to see a lot of those things start to take hold on the rec side. You've also then got more states looking to come on. So you've got Florida being voted on here in the next couple months. So if you start to take stabilization of the more mature markets coupled with growth in new markets, it is a pretty exciting time to be in the space at a national level.
No, I would agree with you. And notably, my opinion is going to be influenced because I just read the report. But I think that when you talk about the prospects, I think you could say that the prospects from individual stakeholders have been similar over the last few years, but they're being realized now. And it's taken the last few years for that realization to happen.
I think that's a really good way to think about it. I mean, we've been through kind of a challenge in the industry the last few years that the broader economy has also been through. But I think it's really reared its head because of the lack of capital access in cannabis. And I gotta imagine on the equipment side, getting funding for some of the different innovations that you've kind of looked at has been challenging. And so I think all of that hard work, to your point, looks like there's a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel as we start to turn the corner into 2025.
The report also mentions the importance of the role of non-MSO retailers. Can you speak to that as to why non-MSO retailers are crucial to the cannabis industry?
Yeah, I think I'd have to go back and look at this particular section to dig into the specifics, but I'll give my opinion on it and would love to hear what you're seeing as well. I think the non-MSO retailers are going to be kind of the voice of what's happening locally. They're going to be carrying the SKUs that the consumers really want, not necessarily just verticalized SKUs, meaning best brands start to win out there, and it's going to become a place where the competition is driven by the value created for consumers. And I think ultimately the long run prospect of the industry has to be around how do you make sure that consumers have an amazing experience? How do you make sure that consumers are safe? And how do you make sure that all of your innovation dollars are making sure that it leads to a better outcome for that group? And I say that because without that group, you're ultimately, they're the ones who are going to be voting on things. They're the ones that are going to be actually spending the dollars that then fund all the things upstream in the supply chain. And so making sure that those whether it's non-MSO or I'll call it like the fragmented retail group that's super close to the consumer and feels everything that they're feeling, I think is just kind of a litmus for what's going on, what's going to happen more broadly in the industry.
I completely agree. I'm a big proponent of craft cannabis.
Mhm.
And I think you're right when it comes to hyper local and understanding the market, but that's not to say that there isn't also a place for the MSO retailer that is going to offer a similar breadth of products across multiple markets.
Right. No disagreement from me on that, right? Like, I'm not big on trying to put too many big buckets around things, whether, it's MSO or non-MSO. I think it's really around that hyper localized approach to the product assortment. Um, you see it show up in more traditional industries with some of the great retailers that there's great case studies on like Lululemon, for example, who took a very hyper focused approach on what Vancouver looked like on in terms of what they would be buying, and then when they opened up a store in New York, super hyper local view of what was happening there. That's much broader scale, much bigger, it's bigger companies, but I do think that the sentiment holds true, and so as the whether it's an MSO or not, when you're opening up multiple stores, it's hard to avoid trying to realize operational efficiencies that come with creating playbooks that move from state to state. And so it is really, really important that merchandising strategy does not get lost in that P&L exercise. Now, don't get me wrong, retailers are doing it, right? There are retailers that are in Michigan that started there, have gone to Arizona, have gone to Colorado, have gone to Missouri that are incredibly successful. So it's certainly doable and is driven by, what I would consider you staying local and staying true to the roots in terms of what the consumer wants there.
So by 2030, LeafLink expects U.S. cannabis to be a $50 billion market. What's it going to take to get it there?
I think a lot of these states that are coming online are really exciting, right? I think that's a big piece of it, and I think if we can continue to see that those regulatory tailwinds, I think we'll see that. Um, the other thing that I would say is you're starting to see. I lost my train of thought there a little bit, but I think it's around the actual oh, the rescheduling pieces I think would be huge, right? Like if we can get to a place where our operators are operating under the same financial conditions as other industries, I think is going to be huge. It allows you to innovate on behalf of the consumer again. It allows you to innovate on your processes. It allows you to get closer to the consumer to make sure you're maximizing sell through. The other piece to that is I do think that there are some things that the industry is battling that maybe aren't talked about a ton, but are really important around some of those things on the farm bill side. And I'm not going to comment on one way or the other where I think that goes, but it does certainly create a challenge when you're held under a little bit of a microscope for what's in your products, and you've got a competitor who's able to ship across state lines, who's able to utilize more traditional financing, like you name it. Like it becomes really, really challenging when you're competing with some of the intoxicating hemp space. Um, so I'd be curious. I mean, what are you hearing from, just what are you hearing from your customers on some of your participants on what they're seeing and how they're feeling about the prospects here?
The prospects of rescheduling.
Yeah, whether it's rescheduling or getting to, the bigger industry that I think we're all kind of forecasting and excited about.
I think many people, honestly, everyone predicts it to be anywhere from 5 to 10. Everyone is planning for big cannabis. Big cannabis is coming. No one knows what that's going to look like. and no one knows exactly what's going to take to get it there. And then, of course, you have the contingent that's actively fighting against it.
Yeah. Right.
But I kind of like that about the industry, where it's not the Wild West anymore, but everyone's sort of trying to set themselves up for success as the industry matures, and still not really knowing what that's going to look like. But I think that everyone has the common understanding that big cannabis is coming, and it might be closer than we think. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. And what I'd be curious to your perspective on as well. It's like you have this opportunity where it forces you to be really, really hyper focused on creating value for your customers. And you have to do some things that are really, really hard. But it's what allows you to kind of put yourself into a position to be successful when and ultimately, if and ultimately when, some of those things happen. But I think ultimately it's a good thing for the industry to kind of push it forward and, maybe move out of some of the shadows that I think in the early days it kind of operated within.
Well, to that point, from an operational perspective, I still think there's a long way to go in terms of GMP compliance, facilities. I mean, a lot of that has been, you were talking about capital and that not being very available over the last few years for some of those equipment upgrades. But I do think that there are some companies that are setting themselves up in terms of GMP compliance that once deregulation or re-regulation happens are going to be so much further ahead of the pack. We've seen that in multiple markets where the people that are innovating and planning for the future, once sort of the lights come on, they're light years ahead of everybody else that's just waiting for it to happen.
And it's so funny you say that. It's not funny. It's challenging to hear like that these, I would call them really, really best in class operators, are sitting there trying to outweight, market challenges that ultimately could lead to insolvency if they don't get solved sooner. And it's a really tricky predicament because in the short term, you're losing out to these, I wouldn't call them bad actors, but those that are flying a little bit looser, when you're just trying to do the right thing to keep people safe and to move the space forward.
Well, and I think that issues with testing in particular and the various testing regulations have really, let's just say, thrown a wrinkle into the market as well in terms of what's acceptable. I think that deregulation or descheduling, sorry.
Careful now.
Should have hopefully a very beneficial impact on testing standardization across the U.S.
Yeah, I hope so. I think so. And, just kind of look forward to like seeing some of these things come to fruition. Feel like we've been so close so many times to then have it kind of pulled or pushed out, or the rug pulled out from under us. Whether it's safe banking or rescheduling, like just feels like there's always some other type of political circumstance that kind of like pushes these things out. And like, I get it. It's hard. It's an election year to try and get something. Like if this is the one thing that you get across the line, like, is that something as, a group that you're going to be excited about? I'm not sure, but it does feel like they're just leaving a lot of really hardworking people in a tough spot as these things continue to get pushed out.
I am optimistic, and I made the same incorrect prediction at the last election cycle, but I'm optimistic that it's the wild card in the back pocket.
Yeah.
Just because we have seen cannabis initiatives on the ballots be a game changer on a hyper local level and that have a large impact across the national election.
Maybe. Yeah. I love your optimism. I'm maybe a little bit more skeptical just because it feels like it's one of those things that for some could feel risky, even though they know that their constituency wants it. But you might very well be right? It might be something where both sides utilize it as a win, or one side starts to utilize it as a new messaging, and the other one has to adopt it because they know how popular it is nationally. You very well could be right. I think the jury's out on it just because of what's been going on the last, call it 7 years.
No, agreed. And the one side's already started teasing it. And
Yeah,
it's already started going viral on IG. So I'm like, okay, that means the
all
other
right.
side's going to come back over. They have to.
Yeah, I think that you hope so. You sure hope so.
But to that point, when I started the podcast, when I would always ask about federal legalization, it was often people would say 1 to 3 years, 1 to 3 years maybe. And over the 3 years of doing the podcast, it's gone to like 5 to 10.
Yeah,
Because people have kind of got disenfranchised from seeming like they were so close to for the industry seeming like they were so close to the finish line.
yeah. I think that's the camp I'm in. I mean, I've been through that. Like I was a 1 to 3 year in 2019, and I think a lot of that has just really shifted. I think less because some of it's probably disenfranchisement. I think other parts of it are just realistic in how slowly things have moved across the board. And I think there are also just been some major, I wouldn't call them setbacks, but distractions at the national level that have taken precedent, and in some instances, maybe rightfully so, going through a pandemic, going through some of the things we've been having on the inflation over the last few years. And so it's just, you don't ever know what other things are going to pop up. And it just feels like until it becomes a true priority, like really a felt priority by the governing bodies, that it's going to continue to kind of get pushed to the state level because that seems like an easy fallback.
No, that's a good, like a few years ago, optimism, then into pessimism, and then transitioned into this realism.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You had mentioned it. Earlier, but I wanted to make sure that we touched on it. So, LeafLink recently acquired Dama's banking division in July 2024. What has life been like after the acquisition, and what were some of the motives behind it?
Yeah. We're still relatively early, right? Less than 60 days in at this point. I think almost 60 days tomorrow. But it's been, I it's been as good as I think we could imagine in terms of the team that came over has just been phenomenal to work with. Their depth and understanding of their customers has been incredibly exciting to learn from and to incorporate into our broader product set. Um, some of the things we thought we knew, we've gotten a new layer of nuance around, and so we're taking those learnings and we're figuring out how do you integrate the e-commerce component to your banking components in a way that's incredibly meaningful and powerful. I think there's some really exciting opportunities that we're kind of newer there, but now that we're a layer deeper, are even more exciting that we're going to start to be able to kind of put into motion in the next 90 to 180 days around provisional credits based on smart safes sitting in the store, offering cash logistics options, underwriting our customers' risk, in real time based on some of the historical transaction flows, things that you really can't do without that level of granularity. We'll be able to do in an integrated and automated way that, as a customer, will surface itself at checkout that simply, simply wouldn't be able to be done if the two things weren't deeply tied together.
What were some of those things that you thought you knew, and maybe your perspective changed after the acquisition?
Yeah, I think we've been looking at banking space for a very long time. The ways in which we were thinking about some of the compliance components of it have certainly gotten more nuanced. Not in any way that I would say is negative or positive, just we think we can be a lot better than we were originally thinking we would be. And I think that we also were thinking that there's a ton of ways to actually streamline the account opening process. We think there's a ton of opportunity to get these solutions in customers' hands faster than we were originally planning. So they've all largely been positive. It's just a little bit of a deviation from the way we were originally planning.
all of LeafLink's products make sense to me. I think they all have a key role in the industry, but do you have any fears over trying to become too much to too many?
All the time, all the time. We talk a lot internally about focus and kind of rooting ourselves in not just what we are today, but what we think we need to be for the industry tomorrow. And we really think that that is the trusted place to transact in wholesale cannabis. Um, you know, we really want to get to a place where when a transaction happens on LeafLink, neither the buyer nor the seller needs to be worried about who they're operating with on the other side. They just need to know that LeafLink has done the heavy work to vet and make sure that they're operating with great partners and that I'm going to get paid and the product's going to sell through. If it doesn't sell through, I'm going to be there with a brand that's going to stand behind their brand promise. And so as we look at the breadth of the different solutions we have, we really center around how do we eliminate, risk in that transaction. And it's going to be something that we continue to iterate on, to continue to try and push forward. We're not finished yet, and I don't think we'll ever be finished. But if it's what we're building does not serve that purpose, then we look at it with a pretty hard lens to say like, hey, is this really going to move us forward in the direction we want to go?
Looking at the potential of a big cannabis, do you foresee a future where there is an Amazon or Walmart for the cannabis industry?
I don't know. It's a good question. I mean, I think they will certainly aim to participate at some point. I think they will be a sales point or distribution point. Again, my perspective, right? But I think they'll be more on the retail side of it and not so much on, the vertical side of it. And I think they would say, okay, whether they treat it like they treat Bud Light, Miller Lite, carry the best brands. And so at the end of the day, the best brands are going to win the day at all of these distribution points. The ability to see how things are selling through, the ability to help drive brand growth, to help your sales teams be successful. Those are durable challenges that I think over time, regardless of Amazon or Walmart coming to the space, you as a brand are going to want those tools in your toolkit to be successful.
Matt, I really do appreciate you taking the time today. Before we get out of here, is there anything else you want to make sure the Cannabis Equipment News audience either knows about yourself or your work at LeafLink?
I just kind of continue to come back. Thank you for as well, David. And I just continue to come back to, looking for ways in which we can really streamline the commerce of the wholesale commerce of the industry. I think there are things that we have available today that we've continued to iterate on and improve on. But at any point there's questions or customers want to dig deeper, I'm always happy to kind of have my own personal detailed conversations with individuals in the industry. I feel like no conversation have I ever left in this space not feeling a little bit smarter than when I walked in. And so just really excited about the prospects of the space, really excited about some of the different things we're building. And if any customers would love to, or just other industry participants would love to chat, I'm always open. And you can always find me on LinkedIn at Matt Hutchinson. So check us out at leaflink.com, get you connected. But really, really appreciate the time, David.
Well, Matt, thank you again. And I hope I didn't break that streak of quality conversations in the industry.
You did not. Really, really appreciate your insights. Would love to kind of get more from you as we go, but appreciate your time today.
All right. Well, before we get out of here, please make sure to like, share, and subscribe to the podcast. You can also help us out a lot by leaving the podcast a positive review on whatever platform you use. If you want to email the podcast, you can reach me at david@cannabisequipmentnews.com with email the podcast in the subject line. You can also subscribe to our daily newsletter. Make sure you get it delivered to our inbox first. For Matt Hutchinson, Chief Product Officer of LeafLink, I'm David Manti. This is the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Welcome to the Cannabis Equipment News Podcast.